3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And joining me again is Dan Spell and Mike Panicello from MUFON. Gentlemen, how you doing?
Doing good, Adam. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing well. A lot of entertainment in the media lately. As far as we were just talking in pre-podcast about these alleged UFOs that the government's shooting down. They're using that acronym of UFOs or UAPs, and honestly, I believe they're doing that. It's a way of them kind of casting like a doubt for people's minds. Like, you don't want them to panic about it being like a foreign country doing this. And there's the allure of the UFO phenomena that they're trying to kind of mix in there. I think personally to pull away people's attention from the media and kind of disregard it.
Yeah, you might be right about that. It muddies the waters about the real UFO UAP issue for sure.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, that's kind of like what they did in the Air Force back in the 50s, right? They would play down something and they would attach it, Roswell. It's being, right, in my opinion, there's a strong chance that was recovered there was military. And because of, people like Kenneth Arnold, who had spotted real UFOs, they lopped it together to kind of discredit what it was that took place there. I mean, it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm. True.
So for you, what's new in your areas, Dan? We'll start with Dan. Oh, by the way, Dan Spell's a former DOD, Department of Defense. What's new in your area? Well,
in Maryland, fairly quiet as far as UFO sightings being reported. Our team has grown quite a bit, though. We're now up to 14 people with a leadership team and field investigators. So that's a good sign. We're real pleased about that. I'm also part of MUFON's experiencer resource team, and I got assigned a case. It's an old one, goes back to 1974. A gentleman was in the Army out in Oklahoma, and he had a UFO sighting just outside of Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and he also had an encounter with entities in his bedroom very near when that UFO sighting took place. So I'm just getting started on that. I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say, even though it is a legacy case.
Yeah, and those are important. It gives a point of origin for a lot of cases for people, right?
It sure does. And I would encourage, any of your listeners out there, even if their encounters or sightings were decades or more ago, go ahead and report it, because that will become part of MUFON's database and will help, with the big data analysis. So yeah, please report them, even though they may be older.
Perfect. Mike Panicello, your area, anything new?
Well, we're up to 7 investigators. I have 2 more working on the exam right now. So once they're done, we'll be at 9. Our monthly meetings are doing pretty well. We pull about 60 to about 60 people. Not yet at our pre-COVID levels, but we're still doing pretty good on attendance nevertheless. For cases, we don't really have anything that stands out. It's been kind of quiet. We have had a couple come in this week that's category 1s, but mostly just lights in the sky. We'll see how they develop once the field investigators make contact with them. They've been doing that this week. The chapter's humming along, and we're looking forward to the spring to start doing some more other activities.
Yeah, get more in the field. So what is, on your opinion, on these quote unquote UFOs they're shooting down? It's mind boggling. And I say this because when you go back to the David Fravor incident, and this guy's using a Super Hornet, he's engaged with it, it's outmaneuvering him significantly. The biggest thing of all, and I never hear this in the shows, any show or documentary, they ignore this. These things are allegedly moving at 13,000 miles an hour, but there's no sonic booms. The air is not being disturbed around them. And so when you hear this, and this is 2004, almost 20 years ago, fast forward to now, we're shooting something like that down. There's no chance. There's no chance at all. Not even with an F-822 Raptor and its sophisticated equipment. We're not shooting one of these down. Whatever these are, in my opinion, foreign governments or somebody privately created a large drone. That's in my opinion. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with you on that. I think that that these are not extraterrestrial craft for the very reason that if you look at historically, aircraft that have had involvements with craft that were believed to be otherworldly, they are not able to shoot them down. They have mechanical problems, they have electrical problems, they have radio problems. They are basically teased by the UFO. They get within weapons range, and then the thing takes off and stops. They're never able to catch them. And then the few times that they are able to actually fire a missile, the military plane is destroyed or injured to the point where it has to return back to base. So the technology hasn't changed. You're right. Like if you look at 2004, you have the F-18 Super Hornet now, and you have the F-22 Raptor, the F-35. However, there's still basic concepts of what was in 2004. The avionics are a little more advanced. The electronics are a little more advanced, but a missile is a missile. And so I think you're right. I don't think that what we're shooting down out there is truly extraterrestrial. I think that this is a smokescreen to hide something else. What that could be is speculation, and I don't want to speculate on that, but I don't think it's aliens.
Yeah, I mean, in recent times, we have, this quote-unquote disclosure, and to probably, mitigate the fear of society, they throw that verbiage in there. I noticed that right away in the news, that they were saying, like, unidentified flying objects. I thought that to be very strange that they utilized that verbiage. And in my mind, I realized people here, because of, now China's a superpower, there's this issue with Russia and the Ukraine. So people here would go into fear knowing that foreign countries are sending objects over here for study or for reconnaissance, whatever it may be. And I think they utilize that verbiage to, again, mitigate the fear factor of our country, and maybe even play it down so people are like, oh, well, maybe we finally shot one of them down. But it's propulsion and rockets, outside of, like you said, more advancement as far as computer technology goes, same thing. It's not changed. We're using the same propulsion. We're using the same rockets. The only thing that's different is one of them is a little more stealthy. It can be depicted as a bird on radar. But outside of that, not much has changed. And it's a scary thought to think that they'd finally go public. Our military, our government, and the news channels are finally saying unidentified flying object when it suits them. And that's scary business to me. I'm reading here. Actually, I'm reading right here. One of them was the size of a car. Right? And through the history of ufology, I don't recall there being anything the size of a car that was reported. And if there were, I think the only one is that Go Fast. But even that thing was moving at an incredible rate of speed over the water. So I don't know.
There was one that I can mention, and that was the object that allegedly touched down outside of in Rendlesham Forest. That triangular shaped object, according to the airmen on site, was approximately that size. It wasn't very big.
Right.
That's the only one I can think of to be roughly the size of a car.
Yeah, and that object had like hieroglyphics on it, if I remember correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah, to me, that's like a really sophisticated reconnaissance vehicle. The way that it described it, the way he said it was behaving, it was near a base. It was like it was collecting data, and then he goes near it, and I believe he said he got like an upload of data in his mind.
Right.
In the form of binary code.
Yeah.
That's creepy. But yeah, I have to believe that those things are, like, I even think the smaller orbs are just there for data collection. And we would do the same thing. If we're going to a foreign country for any reason or exploring anything, we typically put like a smaller robot out there first, or we get some sort of reconnaissance before we send a team in to make sure it's, one, worth our time, and two, it's safe. So that's the belief system I'm under currently.
I think so. That's their version of a drone. Right. We have the quadcopter drones right now, but they have these round orbs that they have that people are reporting.
Right.
That's their version of a drone.
I have to agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, every time I'd spoken to someone, whether it be on or off podcasts in the interviews, and I hear about the orbs and what they do, and even in around paranormal events, they all kind of sound like they have the same purpose. They seem to be doing like probe work in advance to make sure, again, is it safe? Is it worth our time? That's what I gather from it.
Yeah.
So for you, so now let's get into the slides. You have a presentation here. And so for those of you that are just listening, Dan will walk us through what the slides are, what it is we're looking at, and he's going to explain, and we're going to treat it like a PowerPoint presentation minus the images. So go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, Mike and I prepared a bunch of slides about possible impacts of full and open UFO disclosure. And if it's okay with you, Adam, we'll walk right through these.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess the first question that we ought to discuss is, what does that mean? What does full and open disclosure entail?
Well, for me, full and open disclosure is being completely transparent about something, which
exactly.
which our government can't. They borders on what they can or cannot do.
Mm-hmm. So then, the question, guys, is what exactly would be disclosed? Say tomorrow, world leaders said, that's it, we're coming clean. We're going to tell everything that we know. Huh. And there are some bullets here. Are they going to admit that past and ongoing government and military interactions with these entities, these ETs? Would they do that, do you think?
So here's what I want to replace for the government to spare them any kind of ridicule moving forward. They should probably remove the word disclose and put the word acknowledge in, because for them to disclose what they know that would mean them releasing classified documents, where if they acknowledge, they could say, yes, there are UFOs. We know they're real. Is there another biological life form out there? We believe there might be so, and we believe they may or may not be coming here. Is there a hybrid program going on? Well, right now, with the evidence presented before us, we can't say to a certainty there is, but we are looking into it. So there's more power in them utilizing the word acknowledgement than there would be disclosure.
Right.
You have another one, physical entities from Earth.
And this is the actual physical entities, as opposed to what some people believe. Some of them aren't physical at all. They're more they're ephemeral. They're consciousness, but they're not physical, like a grave would be, or a Nordic.
Right.
That's a different animal. Are they would they acknowledge that there are physical beings? Would they acknowledge that maybe they're actually from here on Earth? There's people who believe, guys, right, that what's the word that was used for these entities that aren't from another planet, but actually are from here on Earth?
You mean like us from the future?
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
Believe it or not, that is I'd spoken to an archbishop and many other people of religion, and that seems to be their default. Whenever I ask them about UFOs, it seems to be that they're pre-programmed to say that it's more likely us from the future, which lets me understand that their ability to accept the idea of life elsewhere is just non-existent, which is not a healthy way to look at things. It's not very scientific.
No, it isn't.
Because look, in the near future, I guarantee in the next 10 years with all the probes we're putting out, I think right here in our solar system, one of these moons of one of these gas giants are going to produce life, and whether it be microbiology or a plant. If we found a frog somewhere, something amphibious looking, right? It's going to change what we know historically, period.
Mm-hmm.
This slide, so again, finish up on this slide because it's got interesting bullet points to it.
I mean, it wouldn't just be them saying, acknowledging, we are being visited by others, but there's a whole slew of things that they would have to acknowledge. Take a look at the one on the bottom there, laws of physics as we know them. Right. That would it would change our understanding of physics. Not all of it, but some of it.
Right. I agree, because so last night I was watching this program It featured Lou Elizondo and several other figureheads that are well known. And they said they clocked one of these at 13,500 miles an hour. I had to sit down after that, and I paused the show and had to think to myself, like, well, if you're going 13,000 miles per hour in our atmosphere, again, there would be sonic booms that would be heard at great ranges. The disturbance in the air alone would be, you could hear, that's, if you think what a sonic boom is, that's really what it is. It's a major disturbance in the air. And then it banked right. That's beyond the physics, what we understand.
Well, and just thinking of the airframes is one thing, but what about whatever's inside of them? A human being, I don't think could handle that level of gravity force.
Yeah, the inertia in itself. I mean, consider this: the SR-71, when it was traveling at Mach 3, I think it was like 3.5. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
For that thing to make a right turn, it would have to utilize the area of a full state. There is no bank right, and then like we see in movies, it's turning probably, if I had to guess, the length of a full state before it accomplish a right-hand turn or a right bank. And then this object they're discussing literally just turns right. And so I'm thinking to myself, what can we do as humans to accomplish this? And I'm at a loss here. Outside, because we have a physiology that we have to concern for when we're piloting something, and even drones. Like, let's say you get a drone the size of a desk, and it could achieve great rates of speed, like 13,000 miles an hour. It would still create sonic booms. It would still be heard. It would still disturb the air. So the fact that these things are moving at this speed and they're not creating sonic booms, and there's no air trail, because usually when you disturb the air behind it heats because there's friction, and you would see that trail, which most people today think is chemtrails and they're poisonous or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So these are the things I think about, and that's what it's not just curious, but it bothers me because that's way beyond. I don't think we're going to achieve that even in the next 100 years.
No, I think we're very close to some form of that.
Right.
Another research project that Mike and I did was on USOs, unidentified submerged objects. And what we found was a number of patents that were issued to the Navy for that very thing. I believe one of them was something called inertial mass reduction that would give you that level of speed without the G forces.
Right. Yeah.
So
because
what it does, it what's the word? It manipulates gravity. It's not anti-gravity, but it does something. It creates like a bubble around the craft, so that it can make those maneuvers at those high speeds.
Bear in mind, you ever get a flashlight and you move it left and right really fast, and you could almost see like a trail, right? Like, because there's latency what our eyes see. Basically whatever we're looking at in a room, we're not seeing it in real time. There's a small delay from our eyes to because the eyes are a part of the brain. That's something people don't realize. They're a separate organ. They're part of the brain. But even then, you're using light to see something, and then your brain, your brain is now forming an image in your mind of what it is you're looking at. So there's a bit of a latency there. And it makes me wonder, because another thing is you hear these UFOs and they're moving, and is it you're seeing it move, or did it, I don't want to use teleport, but it went to one point of origin to another point of origin, and the only thing that you're tracking is the light itself. So, I mean, it's mind-boggling. Dan, this keeps me up at night.
It sure is.
And I would hope we get to achieve that. Mike, let me ask you, from your experience and through the years, what do you think, if you had to guess, what do you think therefore, and I don't want to use propulsion, because if we understand when we say propulsion, it's, in either pulling air in or ejecting out the rear or something. So somehow they're moving about. What do you think they're doing?
Well, I think that if you're looking at the traditional UFOs, I believe they're probably using something along anti-gravity or riding a gravitational wave, similar to just folding space. We know that the physics is there to accomplish that. Our problem as humans is we don't have a power source that's large enough to test something like this. It's all theoretical at best. I think that what's going on now in the field with Skinwalker Ranch and the things that you're seeing at Skinwalker Ranch and the possibility of a portal, we know that portals, in theory, can exist with relativity. What they call them wormholes, but the same thing, moving between different locations through subspace. That they might be using that, and whether they're coming from different dimensions, it's a possibility. Or if they're just using it to traverse space as a fast mechanism, kind of like what they did in Deep Space Nine with the wormhole from the Alpha Quadrant to the Gamma Quadrant. So I think that either of those two methods are probably how they're moving about. I know the field is looking into, I know researchers in the field are going into the more paranormal aspect of ufology, where they're linking this with demonic entities, and they go through that means they are some kind of dimensional being. I don't really want to go down that path. I'm not, so I would more by choice, but I think that the evidence for that, I still think that traditionally most UFOs are extraterrestrial based, coming their traditional way to Earth. And I think what they're using is gravitational effects. I think they're bending space-time. And maybe when they get here, they're using electromagnetic generators to ride the electromagnetic field of the Earth, kind of like a surfer does a wave. I think that makes the most sense of how these things are moving around. Or they're creating a little gravity field around themselves. And that would also explain why they can do such amazing speeds and bank so quickly, because they're in their own little pocket of gravity and neglect the effect of our gravity on them and the effects of inertia and G-force. So that's my hypothesis. But I don't really have much evidence to support that. So I can't say it's a 100% theory at this point.
Well, you might be onto something there, because if you consider, so when you look at the waves of an ocean, there's molecules, right? There's many, many molecules. So the molecule itself isn't moving. It's the energy that's transferring through the molecule. And if you figure out a way to convert your craft into a form of and even if you utilize frequencies, like I keep finding those words in all these reports, frequencies and vibrations. And if you utilize these frequencies and you put yourself in a frequency, you're basically transferring energy across a sum of molecules, and which would make inertia a non-factor. It's just a matter of how do we harness it and utilize it. Like you said, they're obviously doing something to replicate here in our atmosphere what it is that they find naturally in perhaps wormholes in space. And that's the big question mark. How are they doing? I'm dying to know. Dan, moving forward with the slideshow, go to your next. Let me know what you got.
So the form that acknowledgement or disclosure would have to come from a whole bunch of organizations, by the U.S. government, by the Chinese government, by the Russian government, by the U.S. military, other militaries, by the United Nations. Scientists would have to be involved, those that have worked on these projects, by whistleblowers, by defense contractors, perhaps people in the medical profession who have had some involvement. Universities and labs, by the great religions of the world, and lastly, by the beings themselves. It isn't just I don't think it can be just the people on Earth doing it. You know, it's one thing for us, for our government, our leaders to acknowledge it, but then the visitors are going to have to acknowledge it as well.
Right. And just by that, so looking at the list you have presented, government, military, UN, scientists, whistleblowers, contractors, medical professions, universities and labs, religions, and non-human entities. Well, we should say non-human intelligence, because again, we're not 1,000% certain what their physiology speaks to.
Right, whatever they are, and there may be different ones. There may be physical entities, and there may be some who are, what's the word? Pure energy.
Right. In any regard, they would have to utilize some form of intelligence to, do what they're doing, manipulate space, come down here. It would require it, because if you had like pure energy, let's say rabbits, they're not going to achieve the same things, right?
Right.
So the biggest problem I see up there are probably government and religion.
And we're going to get into each one of those in a little bit.
Right. Yeah, because religion, if you are outside of Catholics, the Vatican has made a statement. They're looking into space, and if whatever's out there comes here, they're going to baptize it. I guess they're going to convince them that it's the right thing to do is to go to Catholicism or whatever nonsense they conjured up. Governments, however, like as we saw in the news with the objects that they're quote unquote shooting down, using verbiage like unidentified flying objects, there's a double-edged sword to the UFO phenomena for the government. One, if they have knowledge of it, they want to suppress it for the other factors you have here as bullet points to again, mitigate hysteria. And two, what a great smoking gun for any kind of projects we're working on. You know what I mean? Like so for them, there's really no motivation for them to disclose or even acknowledge, because it's a great thing for them to, if we're testing a new thing out in Nevada and people see it, like, oh, it's a UFO, and the government's going to be like, well, hell yeah, that was a UFO, no doubt. And then, but if you ask that same guy, like, are they real and do you have any? He goes, well, we don't believe in them and we don't have any, but at the same time, it's okay for them to utilize it for a scapegoat. So it's tricky business. Now, religion. And I don't mean to pick on religion, but there are some religions on this planet that even if tomorrow they landed in all the major cities and had meetings with all the figureheads of the governments, there are still people that are going to call these things demons. And
sure,
it's just, it's humanity at the end of the day. We're very simple. We have a very singular mindset when it comes to believing things. With the percentages like yourself and scientists and other people of belief, it's scary. So I don't know. I don't know how we're, like you said, reading this list you presented here. That's a tall order. That's a really tall order.
It's a very complicated issue. And how do you get all of these organizations across the planet to agree? We can't get anyone to agree on anything. And how would we possibly get Russia, China, and the U.S. to agree on how this will be handled should that time for acknowledgement come?
You're right, because I'll tell you,
and the religions don't get along, the governments don't get along, contractors are competing for money. It's going to take a real world statesman to pull that off.
It would, or a complete threat to our species, because that seems to be the only time we bind together. Right, when we got to figure something out.
Right.
It's what
a good example of how I mentioned this in our podcast is how I think if we had this event happen and how the world would hopefully handle this would be from the movie Contact with Jody Foster. If you remember how that movie determined who went to visit these aliens for the first contact, they set up a committee of members that represented the broad spectrum of humanity. And you can't find someone that'll meet all the criteria, but they tried to find someone that'll meet most of the criteria. And that would be probably the best way to do it. But that's only if the information becomes known. If it's kept secret, like if the U.S. somehow figures out, or some government figures out how to contact aliens, they'll probably just do it themselves. And we might never know about it.
Yeah.
Which is the worst way to do it.
And Dan could tell you straight away from government experience, they have this habit of compartmentalizing things. So not everyone knows everything, right? It's very
That's
likely.
absolute truth. Yes.
Yeah. It's very likely that some of these people you see in the military over the past 70 years, when they're going on TV and saying, well, there's no such thing as this, and they believe that because it's compartmentalized in such a way that they don't know. They're having people of authority say, this is nonsense, go speak to the public. And so this guy is not lying. He's being genuine when he says to his knowledge, there's nothing extraterrestrial. We don't have any craft, but he would not know. Our presidents, I've had this conversation with several people. They seem to believe that the presidents know everything's going on, and that's not the truth. At best, a president has an 8-year run, at the best. So he wouldn't even have the clearance to know any of these. He wouldn't have the clearance to know about some of our black projects. He definitely wouldn't have the clearance to know anything about extraterrestrial life or anything that might. His job is to run the nation because he is there because of us. He represents the people that put him there. So it's the nation's interests first before any kind of classified. I think it was Bill Clinton, wasn't it, that tried to look into what we had as far as UFOs?
He did. Well, Carter did as well.
Yeah, and they both got shut down.
Yeah,
they didn't have the clearance. It's not bad either because that examples why America's great, right? Because we have a president, we don't have a czar, there's no emperor, But on the same note, it's I could see why people have distrust because ultimately, people can handle things. We acclimate pretty. I mean, if you look at COVID, for the first 6 months, it was terrifying. And Florida mostly had that, like, well, whatever. I'm going to go live my life. And if it gets me, it gets me. We acclimate pretty rapidly. So it's unclear who or how they would have to acknowledge or how they'd come forward about it. I think the biggest obstacle is going to be religion, because if you have scientists up on this in the bullet point and universities and labs. Both of those, if you were to present tangible evidence and they have a ship and there's an alien, you better believe they're on board for the technology out of it. That's their whole motivation. It's all they care about, technology. What can we get for this? Bob Lazar said the same thing. He didn't care about the UFO, the alien part. It was the technology he wanted his hands on.
Right.
And that's a science mind. So out of this list you have in front of me, government, military, UN, and I think religion are the biggest pushbacks. Those are the cons of that list. So the pros on the list being scientists, whistleblowers, contractors, unclear. I don't know about that. But medical profession, if you had alien technology that could, suppress cancer, they're on board and they don't care where it came from. So the non-human entity / intelligence. Now, that's like us going to another planet and you see there's these life forms there and they're at war all the time. They got sticks and they're killing each other. Do we go down there and try to introduce diplomacy? I mean, it's scary business. It's tough. I mean, you're basically asking a primitive mind to expand itself in a short. It would take actually, as I'm saying it out loud, it would take a very long time to introduce yourself gradually, slowly, wait for them to evolve more, more of a cognitive species, and then approach them. Wow, now that I say that, we're the primitive planet people. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. So now me saying it aloud, they're probably taking their time because we're not there yet. That's a scary thought.
How do you think this would happen? And who would determine the acknowledgement or the disclosure? Is it going to be done by us or the visitors themselves going to say, you know what? These people can't get their act together. They can't work together. They're going to screw up the great disclosure. They're going to ruin it. We're just going to go ahead and do it ourselves just by showing up.
I'll tell you what I think. When the non-human intelligence would approach us, soon we're going to build on the moon. We know this. We're going back. I think it's 2025. We're going back 2025.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, because next 2024, we're going to do a test run where we put pilots and they fly around and et cetera, and then we're landing in 2025.
Stay on budget and on the timeline.
Yeah, there's some other entities that are backing that up. Some silent billionaires are making sure that's going to happen, and their only motivation for doing that is because China is they've already landed things there. And by the way, for those people that don't believe we landed there in the 60s, China's calling us in so many words, we pollute, we litter. There's litter on the moon. So it's hysterical to hear that. But yeah, our motivation is that. So now you have Elon. He wants to go to Mars. He wants to terraform, or at least start colonizing and then terraform. When do non-human entities approach us? At that point, when Elon, because when you go to Mars and they put the applications out for the people going there, what's not going to be on the application is the religion box, the race box, and your political box. There's no check to be had there, because on that planet, it makes no sense. It's immaterial. You don't need it. We're going there to colonize and build for humanity a new place to live. And the ideologies that have us separating and dividing here may not be present there. Can't be, because to go colonize Mars, you must behave as a species, a one mind, there's a singular goal here that we have to achieve. And so, do I think the non-human entities approach us here on Earth and go to the different governments? I don't think there's a chance. I think they go to Elon or other people like him that are colonizing elsewhere, and then that's the next slow step to get to this planet, right? It's got to start somewhere smaller. And that's what I'm starting to think.
One of the things there on the screen is the technology that might be revealed. What's going to happen there, guys? Do you think it's going to be shared openly, or is it going to be handed out piecemeal, a little bit at a time?
I think it depends on how the disclosure happens. I think if the government has their way, they'll want to keep it classified. But if the alien craft land on Times Square or land in Central Park, then it'll be very hard to keep that technology secret, because people want to know that they've seen the crafts. They've seen them flying around. They've seen them land. I think it goes back to how first contact would happen. Would depend on how we get that technology.
I think that falls to Elon again, because if they're going to explore technology, you got to bear in mind, these entities have had ample time to watch our governments and leaders before government, anywhere from czars to pharaohs. They've seen how we operate with people. There's definitely a hierarchy. There's the 1% that dictate and delegate work and how you're going to live down to the people below. So if they're going to explore the idea of technology with anyone, it's going to be the Elons of the world, because it's not just Elon. There's other pioneers out there that have the idea of, like, let's put a colony on the moon, or they approach them. That's where the technology, if I'm a sophisticated, more advanced life form, and I'm observing this planet as I'm seeing it now, in my mind, there's no shot I'm going to give technology to any of these governments, because they're in competition with everything we've ever had that we created. Great was a military application before it was used by the people, right? Like GPS was a thing long before we had GPS. It was a military application. The internet and the ability to communicate with people everywhere, that was a military application long before we had it in homes. So if I'm a higher intelligence, I'm observing this, and then I see a guy like Elon and several other figureheads that have these same kind of mindsets where they want to do something for humanity and do. I think that's who they go to first. That would be the logical choice to take, because Elon also, he's not going to go share his technology with all the governments. He's, at the end of the day, and that's right here on the list you had prior, was contractors. He's a SpaceX contractor. He builds these things and he contracts it out for the idea of putting people into space and satellites and going to other celestial bodies. So I think that's the answer, personally. Yeah, Dan, you got the next slide up?
Yes. The next slide, guys, is pertaining to the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act and the NDAA. In there, in Section 1673, is a section on UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomenon reporting procedures. The critical part there is whistleblower protection.
Huh.
That will be a big part of disclosure. And I've heard from people, that say this is going to be a big year. A lot of people who were worried because they they signed an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. They can't talk. But if they're given this whistleblower protection, and now that act is signed into law, they're going to come forward and talk about what work they've done. And that, of course, pertains to reverse engineering or things like that of crashed craft that we've recovered.
Well, it's a shame.
So that NDAA is important.
Yeah, it's a shame they didn't have that for Bob Lazar a long time ago.
Yeah, it would have made his life a lot better.
Oh, much better. I mean, this guy, a lot of people don't like Bob, and they think what he says is incredible and non-tangible, but if you listen to a long time ago, 20 plus years ago, where he described how these objects would behave, where they would turn belly up and go the direction of the belly, and then you watch the gimbal video and several other videos, and they behave exactly that way.
Yeah.
That's mind-blowing. I mean, that's pretty incredible. He described elements long before they were charted. And they called them, they said, you're full of shit. And now those very elements are charted. They're known. This is science fact. I think this is a big deal. So this protects any whistleblower, right?
Yeah, it does.
And
there are limits to it, of course. I mean, they can't, when they come forward and talk about the work they did, they still have to protect certain classified information.
Sure. Yeah.
In other words, they can't give everything away, but they will be allowed to talk about work that they've done involving UAPs.
Yeah, I would agree, because that UAP research and discovery is not going to benefit foreign countries as far as copying ideas of what they use. And they very well can't come up with, well, we also have an aircraft that because they can't do that because that's our Black Project aircraft.
Right.
I get that. So this is the government created this, right? This does protect everyone.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there's a number of people I'd spoken to. Now I'm glad now that I hear this, and I was unaware of this, some of the off podcast interviews I do, a lot of these guys are military, and their fear of even speaking about it is the reprisal that would come with it. One guy, and clearly I won't say his name. I just had an off podcast interview today with a gentleman, but he worked for a laboratory in California, and his job was kind of in and around energy and how to sustain it without modern, fuel, et cetera, et cetera. And he says he would frequently see other military figures come in, and they would go to a sub-level that he can't achieve. But that, by him saying that could be any building, right? I mean, you could go to the headquarters for Xbox, and they have a floor where they're creating games, and they don't want it leaked out of them. They're going to have an area you can't get to.
Sure.
But even though he says that he believes in the next decade, we're going to be making leaps and bounds with sustainable energy for our country. So, but for the military guys, I hear the same thing from them. They don't want to deal with the blowback. And so this program, I could introduce this idea. Maybe it'll influence someone to come out, I would think.
Now, there is one thing to throttle or slow down that these whistleblowers coming forward. According to the NDAA, Section 1673, they have to do so through authorized channels. In other words, they just can't go to the New York Times and say, "Hey, man, I've been working on UFOs out in Nevada." They have to come forward following protocols.
Right. That, I imagine that's to screen them, to make sure they're not going to come out and talk about the new jet we're building.
Right.
Right. So, I mean,
right.
If you go up there and say, "Hey, listen, this is who I am. I work for blah, 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 and I want to discuss what my findings or what the things I know about, UFOs, UAPs, whatever it is," so long as you're not talking about military missiles and guns and jets, I think that's why they go through those channels, is to filter out what you're going to say.
Mm-hmm. I think you're probably right.
Yeah, I mean, that's in my imagine, because if the guy goes straight to CNN and he's talking about UFOs and et cetera, and then he's like, "Yeah, it's in the same compartment as this new jet we've been working on. We call it the bubble. Cat's out of the bag," right? So yeah, I can see imagine a whistleblower from the 60s, and we're working on stealth technology in the 60s. that cat's out of the bag, because we didn't really know about the F-117 and the B-2 till 91 in Iraq.
And people thought those were UFOs.
Right. People
that were hanging out around Area 51 believed they were looking at UFOs.
Yep, exactly that, because they were, relevantly silent. And, just to clear it up for people and this other thing too, no matter what's moving through our air, no matter what size it is, if it's moving at a high rate of speed, it's disturbing air. You're going to hear the airflow disturbance, period. Which makes the allure of UFOs that more exciting, because there's been there's a guy I've spoken to, and this isn't one guy. I've spoken to David Marler. David Marler was on, Netflix and several other shows.
Is he the gentleman who very knowledgeable on Black Triangle?
Yes.
Okay.
Bear in mind, some of these things are great in width and length, but it's how thick they are. They're basically a building going through the air. And if Walmart got up tomorrow and flew across your neighborhood at just 30 miles an hour, you would hear it would be disturbing the air. You would feel the pressure change as it goes over you. These objects are not doing that. That should really capture people's minds and understand that whatever we're up against here, whatever these are, they're utilizing physics that we can't comprehend, period. And that's what makes it tough. Again, should full UFO disclosure happen? Well, we kind of discussed that.
Well, let's take a look. There's a quote here on the screen, and I'll read it for the audience, by John Podesta. John worked in the Clinton administration, I believe.
Yeah.
And he wrote, or he stated, "I think it's time to open the books on questions that have remained in the dark on the question of government investigations of UFOs. We ought to do it because the American people, quite frankly, can handle the truth. And we ought to do it because it's the law. It is time for the government to declassify records that are more than 25 years old and to provide scientists with data that will assist in determining the real nature of this phenomenon." He, I believe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Podesta was tasked by President Clinton to go find out what was happening. And he, I think, was stonewalled. Does that sound about right?
That's exactly.
That is correct.
Okay.
So during the Clinton administration, there were movies, popular movies, Independence Day, several of them, where they describe Area 51. Now, we're denying the existence of that base at this time. Area 51 is fiction. The only U.S. president to acknowledge its existence and bring it to fruition, now it's a thing, was Obama, right? Now, from Clinton to Obama, there's a president there in between with 2 terms, right? And when the Clinton administration really started digging into this, it was prior to the popular movies. We're talking, I believe that was in 1994, where 1994. He's making inquiries into the UFO phenomenon based upon something that he read an article from Jimmy Carter about what Carter saw on a plane flight. Another piece of memoir from Ronald Reagan, where Ronald Reagan was on a flight and he saw something that was enormous and moved at a great rate of speed. So naturally, Bill Clinton looked into it. Keep in mind what Bill Clinton was. At the time, I believe, is the youngest president elected. Is that right? Or is it Kennedy?
They're very close in age. I'm not sure who was the younger of the two.
It's either Kennedy was 46 or Clinton was 46, or because one of them had been 4. Well, in any regard, Clinton was a really outgoing, outspoken, very down-to-earth guy. And he went digging into this to find out about it. And like you said, he put Podesta and he had like a small team to investigate, and they got shut down at every angle. They got shut down. And the key reason is because he lacked a clearance. And when people hear that, they're like, well, that doesn't mean he's a president. Well, he's only there for maybe 8 years. How did they know he doesn't drop out of presidency, go write a book about all the government secrets? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's people in the know. And I tell you, when you want to know who's in the know, go to public records, find out what general has been sitting the longest, and you'll find a fair amount of them. They've been hanging around decades. colonels and generals and people to know. And even those guys are compartmentalized. They only know what one might know, the other may not know. And in some way, that's an intelligent thing to do, because if one guy does decide to leak, he's not leaking the full amount of information. So at the end of the day, who knows everything? I don't know. What do you think, Dan? Who knows everything?
No, I don't think they do.
Yeah, I don't think there's one individual who just knows all. Right? There's no cigarette guy from the X-Files, I don't believe. And even that guy didn't know everything. Let's go. Pros and cons. Read it off, Dan.
Okay, so the pros of full and open disclosure or acknowledgement. As Podesta said, the people deserve the truth. The people can handle it. They just need to be told what's going on. Another pro is humanity may advance by any new technologies that are shared or revealed. And there's a certain segment of the population that are really into the UFO phenomenon that are hoping and praying that Earth and humanity will be saved by these visitors. True or not, I cannot say, but there are people that are hoping for that. Another one, it's just hypothetical, was peace will prevail if they come, if we acknowledge that they're here. Can you guys think of anything else? What other pros?
I think one pro for certain is that we will start viewing each other very differently. All right. Because right now we still view one another based on color, culture.
Yeah.
I think when you have a new species and you figure out how they achieved what they achieved to get here, because I promise they didn't do it by having ideology involved. At some point or time in their existence, they had to say, we have to do as a species, like how we are going to Mars, as a species, we have to do this. And we have to, in order to do this, because this is, whether it be portals or traveling the vastness of space, we're going to be together generations. You're not going to travel, the universe in a single generation, even if you have achieved the speed of light, even if you're using wormholes. Think how huge the universe is. There's going to be a few generations there. If you have these great technologies. For us, forget it. We have to figure out a way to freeze ourselves. Mm-hmm. So the only other pro is I think humanity takes a better look at one another to appreciate what we are versus, because if these so far, these observers, these entities are so far, they're benign, right? They're neutral. They haven't hurt us, and whoever gets abducted, they get returned. Like whenever human science abducts animals for study, they don't go home. The majority of them don't even live after. We go home. So for the most part, they're neutral. What we should be thinking about is if they made it here, what's next to make it here, and what's their agenda? Will they be the same way? Because, if you look historically speaking, these things have been around for thousands of years, according to historical record. And some of the, the ancient aliens, I don't know. But we would have to, I think that'd be the key thing of all of it, is we would definitely look at each other differently. The flip side of the coin is people are radical. It's pushback. So yeah, go with the cons and we'll see if that pops up.
That very first bullet I have is, what if the truth about the visitors and our own very existence, what if we find out that it's absolutely horrid? And I'll give you an example of that. There are people out there who are saying that humans are nothing but property to these entities. What if that is correct? What if our very existence, in another example, it's a type of a matrix, a game? Have you guys heard that?
I have, actually. Mike, what are your thoughts on that, Mike? Curious.
Now we're living in a hologram?
Something like that, yeah.
It's hard to believe. The math shows that it's possible. It would explain a lot of things. But
what can you give an example of that? What do you mean? What would
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so like one of the examples it would give would be the whole idea of, well, aliens traveling through space, because you would not be in a three-dimensional area, you'd be in a two-dimensional. I don't really understand the physics behind it, but that's one of the ones that was explained. I actually did a PowerPoint presentation on this a long time ago, and I'm trying to remember what I put into it. If you want, I can pull it up. Just give me a minute. But yeah, but the thing about it too is I don't know. I guess it's because it's I'm trying to articulate. I'm sorry, I'm not doing a very good job.
No, you're fine.
So I guess the question is, what if we're just lab rats? What if that turns out to be, or some variant of that?
Well, I'm going to tell you, Dan, that's the likelihood of that is very likely. I'll tell you why. Let's pose back to what we said earlier. You travel to a planet, you find primitive life, us. We're killing each other for reasons that they can't comprehend. Like, oh, they're really killing each other over their belief system? Like, do they not value life? In their eyes, if you have to read literature to know killing another human is wrong, something's wrong with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bear in mind, Earth is what now we know that there are not just other exoplanets and other galaxies. We're exploring the idea that we might be a bubble of a universe and inside of a larger plane of many universes. I think there's more than likely, with their technology and what they're capable of achieving, and we see it, there's the likelihood that there are many, many planets with life equivalent to us, or more primitive than us, or even slightly more advanced. Even if you add 1,000 years to humanity, what are we doing in 1,000 years? I still don't think we're achieving what they're achieving. We might get there eventually, but we're one channel in a larger National Geographic study by these non-human intelligence. They're probably studying many planets. I talked to my daughter about this. If we found another solar system in our galaxy, not when I say not far away, 60 light years, but that's pretty far. If they are equivalent to us in technology, they have the same radio technology, the same internet, all that stuff, we still can't hear from them it takes 100,000 years for a radio wave to cross the galaxy, let alone the universe. So if anyone's equivalent to us, and there's many civilizations out there that are equivalent or even slightly more advanced, we're still not going to hear from them. So it makes me wonder why SETI is still funded the way it is. Now flip to the other side. Many civilizations have probably gone extinct already. Some of them have yet, or they're right in that stage. There's probably planets that are right in that stage where they're becoming single cell organisms to, evolve to something else. So my answer is, are we lab rats? I think so. We're being observed. If they've been around for as many of 100 years as claimed, and they haven't approached us yet, the only explanation for that is we're here for study. Their only motivation to go after our nuclear technology and shut down missiles, and because they don't want the study to die. We got to preserve the study. So why do they pitch peace to humans? Whatever you hear, a lot of these people have experienced say, well, they're telling us to be peaceful and not to kill each other. Well, of course not. The channel will go dead. Ratings for this planet are really high. You people are interesting. And that's that, in my opinion, I think, yeah. So to that point, yeah, we're lab rats in some form or another. Entertainment mostly and science study, but it still forms to the same point.
Okay.
The next one,
there's an argument, guys, that unlike what Podesta said, what if the people can't handle the truth? What if that, from that first bullet, that the truth is absolutely horrid? Can people handle that knowledge? If everything that they've been taught and believed their entire life is deemed wrong and false?
Well, I don't think they're going to handle it so much as they're going to acclimate. Because if it's beyond your power, all right. If UFOs touch down tomorrow, we see them and they're subhumanoid and they're treachery looking and it destroys our belief systems. We're going to be, we're going to be messed up for a little while, but eventually life goes on. People, if we learned anything about humans, we are so self-centered, self-serving, and preoccupied that it's the shock of it will wear off within a few years. And it more than likely will become to the point where unfortunately, we have a new thing to get on social media and bash, or have new reasons to discriminate. Then there'll be the pro groups that are going to embrace them, and there's going to be and there'll be a new reason for humans to separate against one another. It's going to be this thing where we say, well, we're pro the new life forms, and then there's the people like they're the devil, and then there's the other people like they just don't belong. That's just human nature. So handling it, no, we're not going to handle it. We are going to adjust. We're going to acclimate over time. Religion, listen, if anyone out there is going to acclimate the fastest, it's going to be the Catholic Church. Out of all the religions, they're going to be the ones to adjust. They're the wealthiest conglomerate on the planet. Mm-hmm. The last thing they want to do is collapse, which is why you hear them saying things like, we'll baptize them. We're looking into space stuff. They're adjusting now. They're already making adjustments because they're making room for the idea that we just might find something. And we have to be in a position where we embrace it first and we say it's God's creation. And mark my words, in the course of time over the next decade or so, you're going to start hearing this evolution of the biblical word about how God created everything. That's going to happen. I promise.
Well, it's in the book of Genesis already, right?
Right. But they're going to expand on that.
God created heavens and the earth.
Exactly. And they're going to expand on that because it used to be God made here and here alone and everything revolves around us. And as we become more sophisticated and we use better technologies of study, they start evolving the biblical word. We've seen this happen. Like we've seen kings, like King James, change the Bible. He didn't like the thieves, the thous. That book can't exist because it's contradicting something in my campaign as king. We've seen this happen. So religion will acclimate overall. And there's even like Buddhism, where to them, it's going to have like little to no effect. Because at the end of the day, it's about loving life and being equal to life. So to them, culture, race, and they don't, immaterial. However, in the Muslim I don't know. That's going to be tough because we're in the 21st century and they're still practicing medieval practices over there. You know what I mean?
Right. Unfortunately, a good segment of them are.
Yeah.
Who knows, though? That could evolve, too. Who knows? It's a wild card for sure.
Well,
we just don't know about some of them.
It could be that aliens come and some of the people who follow that Muslim stance say, wait a minute. Who are they now? And so they take their faith and they expand on their own faith and say, now let's make room for more. Maybe that could be a plus. Maybe it changes all religion for a good thing. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Global economic. So the global economy will collapse. That might be something. What do you think of that, Dan?
Mike, you want to go ahead? What do you think? You want to take that one first?
Well, I think, like anything else, when something shocks humans, the stock market is always influenced for the good or the bad. Let's give an example. COVID-19 comes out. People for a year and a half, 2 years are struggling. Workplaces are closing, and we watch the stock markets affected by this. Now, we're not even recovered from the COVID pandemic. We're really still not recovered from it. But thereafter, we watch things like rent go up, food go up, and now the war starts and we're going to blame the war for food, gas prices going even higher. The global economy is literally manipulated by the people of power because who's to say what gas costs? It's not like we're running out of it. We know in Alaska, we have enough oil reserve to carry us through hundreds of years. So the aliens coming and crashing the economy, I don't know, because people are still consumers. You got to remember what human beings are. Who has the nicest pair of shoes? Who has the better phone? That's who we are in our nature. It'll slow down for a few weeks because we're the shock of it. Like, oh my God, these things are here. They're new, but it'll wear off. So I don't think the economy will collapse unless our visitors say, hey, why are you paying for electricity being formed out of fossil fuel and et cetera,
Bingo. There you go.
Right.
That's the issue, the petroleum economy.
Right. That's where so not so much the economy as it is industry will take the hit, because our visitors could say, well, wait a minute. Are you really opening all these facilities and treating cancer when we could give you this? And when I say this, I don't want people to misunderstand me by saying that they have something in their planet that's better or their ship that's better. It could be the venom of an ant in the Amazon forest that cures cancer, and we neglected it or we ignored it, and they present it, and now it's out in the open and there's nothing that can be done about it. So the economy overall, as far as consumers, won't be really hurt. It's industry that's going to take the blow, because when you have that kind of technology in your face and they're offering it up, yeah, that's where the problem hits. What are your thoughts on, so you have another one, government will fall. That's catches. So what do you think of that because you worked in government, what do you think would happen there?
Of course, I've only worked for the U.S. government, so I can't speak what Russia, what China, or even the UK would do.
Right.
I think it depends on how the government handles it.
Right.
And how, if that open communication and meetings with these entities takes place, it depends on what the governments do. So I guess what I'm saying is that the governments of the U.S., China, Russia, England, and the rest, Australia, and the rest of them, it's in their hands. It depends on how they react to it. If they tell the truth, or if they lie about it or don't handle it well.
Mike, what do you think?
I agree with Dan. I think it's just, well, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
It's will the government collapse?
No,
Right.
Government's going to survive. The government's not going to collapse with disclosure. I think.
What about totalitarian states, Mike? That's a wild card.
Right.
Like Iran, for example.
Well, they're pretty violent. I'm pretty sure what they'll do is just kill everyone back into submission, kind of like what these totalitarian states are doing now. I'm a little more pessimistic, I think, on that regard. I think that human nature is human nature. Disclosure and a UFO craft coming will get the ball started on a lot of things that we've already talked about. But I don't know if it can change the full fundamentals of human nature to the degree that it'll take down totalitarian states. It'll reorganize government into a one world government, and we'll all live like Star Trek in a peaceful society. I think that we have to do that on our own. And I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't been contacted by higher civilizations, because I think they're waiting for us not just to reach a technological level where we can understand their technology and use it in a way that won't destroy it ourselves, but we also have to raise our consciousness, and we have to become more evolved as a human species to get past some of our more primitive tendencies. And I think that's probably the biggest reason why we don't have disclosure. And when we do that on our own, when we start changing our consciousness and we start rising up and changing our more basic fundamental instincts like greed and jealousy and control and power, that will start taking down the totalitarian states. That will change the way we look at government and the way we look at each other as a species, as a more of a group of connected individuals instead of those of the haves and have-nots and the elites and the peasants. And then I think we'll have disclosure. And so I think that's what they're waiting for. And so, yeah, the long way around your answer is I don't think it's going to change the way states are functioning now. But I think when we do have disclosure, we would already have changed the way we interact with states with the capital S.
I agree. So on the cons list, we have people will panic, religion will collapse, Governments will fall, and anarchy and global strife and war. I'm going to lop those all together. I'll tell you why. As humans, and I know people like this, there are people who they believe the Bible verbatim. That is it. That is the written word, the written law. When you introduce another civilization, another species from somewhere else, they are going to question their figureheads in their churches. They're going to say, what is this now? Because you've been telling us for all these years, this is it. And this isn't just going to happen in Christianity here in America. It's going to happen everywhere. Muslims and other religions are going to question their religious figurehead. You told us this. What is this now? Then you're going to have anarchy because people are going to push back. I hate to say this again. How many human beings don't kill someone because of religious fear of hell? How many human beings don't cheat on their spouses in fear of going to hell? You know what I mean? A lot of people, they live their lives God-fearing. And then there's a majority of the people that don't believe in God, that they live their lives in fear of government and going to jail for reprisal of things they might do. And then people will, once we have a civilization, another species come here, people are going to look at the government and say, why have you not told us sooner? So yeah, you're going to have anarchy at a lot of levels. It will eventually iron out. Like I said, people will acclimate, but for the first few years, it's going to be chaos because it's not so much of the fear, the panic. It's, have we been lied to? Why are we living our lives in this state that we're living in currently if these rules do not abide, they don't apply to us? So the responsible party here are the non-human intelligence. They're responsible to come here and convey a message. We don't want you to be misled. The rules that you live by are the rules we live by. We don't kill one another because there's a higher entity up there, a greater consciousness, if you will. Is it exact to the book you guys have been reading? Not really. I mean, the 10 Commandments make sense, but the rest of it, open for interpretation. A lot of Muslim people, I've learned this in recent times, the Quran is viewed by religious figureheads, and it's not shared in its entirety to everyone. It's translated in, like, as you go to see your pastor at a church, he has a sermon, and he takes a part of the Bible that's interesting to him for that week, and he creates a sermon around it. And so what he's really doing is taking the words of the Bible and forming his opinion on what that translates to his constituents. And that's where things become problematic because people want to believe, you want to trust your religious figurehead. You want to trust your government. And the minute you find that you feel that they're not being, transparent with you, that's where problems start. And that's the pushback of humanity, in my opinion, at that point. That's going to be the anarchy. Will the government collapse? No, they're going to operate, but I promise you there's going to be a lot of compartments that are going to be changing. The NSA, what do they do? Dan, what do they do? What does NSA do if they decide to land and talk to us globally at once? Like, what they have to.
Well, NSA has two basic jobs: to collect signals intelligence on our adversaries, and the second part is cybersecurity.
Huh.
So they don't really have, other than helping track what's going on in the skies with our sensors, I don't know that they'd have a real heavy involvement with it.
What part of the government would address, like, if tomorrow they landed in every state at the wherever the mayor is, everywhere, every city, they just landed to have a unified, we're going to bring this to the surface. Who handles that in the government?
Well, the military would be all over it, followed by the CIA and the State Department. They're probably the ones that would be all over it.
Makes me wonder if they have a protocol that exists for that. I mean, I would think they have to. They have to, if they're seeing what they're seeing around our military installations and aircraft and they had to have formed a protocol by now. We're not privy to it.
I can't prove it, but I bet they do.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be privy, but there has to be one in place, just in the event of. I mean, we sent the Voyager probes in the 70s with a message to potential extraterrestrial life. And these are advanced scientists. They didn't do that because they said, well, there's nothing there, but just in case. They had to have an idea that someone, somewhere, somehow will come across this. Otherwise, they wasted real gold. They made that record out of solid gold.
Right.
So, what a waste of money. In a nutshell, in summary, I think people, I don't think they're going to handle it well. I think they acclimate. I think government will have to adjust. Religion's going to take the biggest hit, and not because, you know, they're not going to be able to try to collect themselves. It's just how many people have blind, and I know these people, Dan, I'm related to some of them. If you speak aliens to them, it's the devil's work. If you go against God in any way, shape, or form, you're going to go to hell or purgatory or whatever it is. I know people that think like this. And to me, and I hate to say this, but it's like they're brainwashed, you know, like I'm, as a young kid, call everything into question. You know what I mean? Well, you know, and I use the Tower of Babel as an example all the time. So when I first heard that story, and it really stemmed from me asking a relative, why are there Asians, whites, blacks? Why are we different? And that's what they gave me, the Tower of Babel.
The Tower of Babel.
Yeah, because we went to go find heaven, and God struck it down and changed us by nation and language and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember being a kid thinking, we have NASA. You know, we are beyond the tower, you know? So at the end of the day, we evolved in different places and we evolved differently. We're still human. We have the same DNA. We are all family here. And until the day we realize that, I don't think it's sophisticated beings that don't want anything to do with us, period. I think Elon and some of these other people, like I said, they're the ones that get approached when the time's right. When they see that they're going to this other planet, and the people are going to this planet to create and terraform, that they're not going there with any ideology. They're going there as a human race to build and terraform together. That's the guy that gets approached, not the good. There's no way they're going to approach the government first. What do you have? What do you have on the end here, Dan?
Question is,
good question.
Has disclosure already happened in some form? In other words, have we been given over decades a salami slice disclosure? Are we being acclimated to the fact of these visitors using mass media, whether it's movies, music, books, TV shows, and documentaries? And you guys well know there are scores of these out there available to watch, read, and listen to. And also the release of the military videos. Is that a subtle way of prepping the population for a disclosure? And of course, the New York Times article.
Huh.
Or is all of that coincidental?
Well, it's not coincidental. I might have said this before. So on my phone, my screensaver on my phone is a clock that's fading. And I put that on my phone because it reminds me that we're all up against time. Time is not on our side, period. So what we do each day, we have to get the most of it and make the best of it, because those precious minutes, when they pass, they're past us. It's over. So that same thing could be said for the U.S. government. Why are they releasing these videos? Why are they speaking up now? Why are they bringing this to our attention now? I think the clock's running out. Let's be honest. Billionaires are going to space, and they're doing it competitively. You have one billionaire by 2026 wants to have a cruise that goes around the moon and back. Another billionaire wants to put celebrities into orbit for elongated periods of time to not only be out there and experience space, but to film, to have a reality show. The clock's up. The clock's on us, and eventually, one of these billionaires is going to go to space. They're going to see something. Well, no, and bear in mind, if we're having a billionaire create a cruise, a luxury cruise around the moon, and for whatever reason we go to the dark side of the moon and we find some structure, and it's being speculated right now as we speak, and not even by us, China has speculating that there's a large structure on the dark side of the moon that's got their full interest, that they now want to send a probe to that location. Our billionaire is going to have this cruise established before China gets the ability to go to evaluate what this is. So if you have a cruise full of people and they see this mega structure, the questions are going to start. And then they're going to see perhaps maybe UFOs or UAPs, or the clock's against the government right now. So I think this closure is not done because they care and they want to share the wealth of information. I think they're coming to a point where they have to. They have no choice. Technology is getting more sophisticated. People are seeing more. Cameras are getting better. We're going to have Neuralink soon. Who knows what we're going to observe on our own. So I think they're on the clock.
Okay.
Media and UFOs 1902-22. Wow.
Yeah, we did a little research on this, and some of these numbers may be low, especially the 5 alien UFO/alien documentary movies. I think that has gone up quite a bit. But what we found was, since 1902, 645 movies have been made that in some way involve space travel and UFOs. 8,000 books, at least. And the interesting one, there are a number of songs that have been written that contain references in the lyrics to UFOs. At least 55 TV shows, including dramas and comedies. The documentary movies, it's got to be well over 5 by now. And if you look at some historical paintings that actually show what look like flying saucers in them, at least 10 of those.
Huh.
So it isn't anything new. This stuff is, we've been exposed to this for a long, long time.
The UFO alien documentary movies that number is easily in the hundreds.
No, I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah. UFO alien historical paintings. I don't know. 10 could be, if you're talking to ones that are in, biblical paintings and
exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Going back antiquity.
Yeah. I feel like that's an accurate number. 8,000 UFO alien books. That's crazy.
Yep. Over 8,000.
645 UFO alien movies. That's
going back to 1902.
That's impressive. And 86 songs written.
Oh yeah. I have a spreadsheet with a list of all those too.
To add to that list, Dan, there's a song by Porno for Pyros called Pets from the 90s.
Really?
Yeah. And it's Perry Farrell. He used to be in Jane's Addiction, and he has a song.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, it's called Pets, and it's by Porno for Pyros. If you listen to that song, he's basically saying if we don't start behaving correctly, we're going to make great pets.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier.
Right, yeah. So it's kind of initially that is the song I wanted to be the intro to this podcast, but I couldn't get the rights. So yeah, that's an interesting statistic. That's a lot more than I expected to see. But then again, I should expect it, right? Science fiction, there's this thing, and I think people are unaware of it, or maybe they're aware of it. Science fiction usually ends up becoming science applications somewhere down the road.
Oh yeah.
It's art imitating life, and it's bizarre because what movie was that? I watched this movie as a kid, and the guy was talking. It's not Star Wars, something like Star Wars, where the guy was talking to a person on a device in his hand. You see in his face, and sure enough, years later, it's FaceTime. It's a real thing.
Was that Star Trek?
No, it was a movie I saw on HBO as a kid, and I can't think of the name of it right now. I can't get it's an older movie, probably from the 80s, but I saw it as a kid somewhere in the mid 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, bizarre enough that the first time in 2010 when I saw an iPhone and the applications they were talking about they were going to have coming, I thought of that movie right away. I was like, wow, this is that movie. And then you go back to movies in the past where they touch their ear and they're talking to someone that's nowhere near them. Bluetooth has come about. It's art imitating life, right?
Sure.
So when you see a science fiction movie, pay attention because some of the most brilliant minds are creating these storylines. Like James Cameron, that guy's ability to have foresight and what technology is. If you look at the first Terminator, and you hear, you watch the movie and you talk about before the internet was even a thought, he was describing the internet in that movie to the T.
What was it called? Skynet or something like that?
Skynet, yeah. And he was discussing how Skynet infiltrated all the computers of humanity and turned against us. And in the 80s, when you hear that, you're like, what kind of shit is that? And then you fast forward to the mid 90s when it was 1997 when this alleged to happen, but it gets pushed back as they it's the movie thing. But anyway, it would be 1997. And you fast forward from the 80s to the 90s, and I'll be damned if internet connections weren't very available everywhere. And undoubtedly, it was a military application at one point long before we had it in the home. So then the likelihood of that scenario playing out is very likely. And this is a man who's creating movies who really has no science background. He had the foresight to see that. So I always tell people, watch the movies. I'm not saying exactly. I mean, I just spoke with Jean-Pierre the other night. If AI were to want to come after us, they're not going to use robots. The resources it makes no sense for them. They would just put us in the Stone Age, turn all the power off, and unleash probably a bunch of viruses. And whatever's left over, they'd use nanotechnology to finish us off.
Right.
It's more viable that way. But, yeah.
Mike, or Adam, I think we lost Mike. I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah, we did. We did. Well, we're coming to conclusion anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, you have anything left for the slide you want to add?
Boy, there's so much more we could have covered. Well, actually, we did. We talked about society. We talked about religion. Yeah. I think we did. Yeah. I think we did cover it all. So,
I have that habit of I see bullet points and I start I start adding things together. You know what I mean? Because I look at everything as a whole. I try to look at everything as a whole. And when I think of repercussion and reprisal, you take what humans do now in social settings now, and you just amplify it by 20. And that's usually how I come to conclusions on things, because it's unfortunate. Our behavior is it's pretty bizarre behavior. We will reach back out to Mike here in a minute. And then for those of you that are listening, before I go, mention your podcast again and any other media you want out there. And I'll put it in the description as well.
Yes, Mike and I have a podcast. It's on YouTube. It's called, we changed the name of it. It's now called UFO No Limits, No Boundaries. So our next podcast is going to be talking about, and maybe Mike or Adam, you've heard about this, a being that people call Valiant Thor.
Huh.
Have you heard of him?
I haven't.
Valiant Thor, so according to the legend, landed just across the river from D.C. in a field. This would have been like in the 1950s, I believe, and got out of his craft, and a police cruiser just happened to by there and stopped and walked up to this guy, and this creature, he identified himself as Valiant Thor and asked to be taken to the Pentagon. And according to legend, the policeman, contacted his superiors. He reached out to the Department of Defense at the Pentagon, and they took him over there immediately to the Pentagon. And for years, according to the story, he worked with the U.S. Department of Defense. Huh. So Mike and I are going to delve into that UFO legend in our next podcast.
Yeah, let me know. I want to hear that. So when you guys release it, I'm not going to research it on my own. I'm going to wait for your podcast and learn it.
Okay, sounds good.
Excellent. So for those of you who are listening, we're going to say good evening, good day, good night, whatever it is for you, and I'm going to talk to Dan in post.